is Pavel Lapere, and I'm an ecosystem builder out of Baltimore, Maryland.
My name is David Ponraj, and I am the founder of Startup Space.
My name is Christine Lai, and I am honored to serve as an ESHIP community activator.
My name is Joey. I'm with the Air Force Innovation Community, AFWorks.
Charles Ross. I'm with the International Business Innovation Association.
My name is Melissa Bradley. I'm in Washington, D.C. and proud to be part of 1863 Ventures.
My name is Jose Alvarez, and I am part of the Charlotte, North Carolina community.
Lars Kruger, Boise, Idaho.
I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yeah, I'm in Detroit, Michigan.
My name is Cecilia Wessinger, and I'm an ESHIP community activator.
Welcome to the final day of this interactive online virtual 2020 ESHIP Summit. I'm Andy Stoll, a Senior Program Officer at the Kauffman Foundation and your MC for today. For this, our fourth ESHIP Summit, nearly 850 people have joined us throughout this three-day event from all 50 US states, DC, Puerto Rico, and 20 countries to explore ways we can build more inclusive, sustainable, and equitable entrepreneurial-focused communities. Most of you are joining us inside our virtual conference platform. For those of you joining today's session via the Kauffman Foundation YouTube live stream, you can use the Twitter hashtag ESHIP Summit to interact. For those of you inside of the virtual platform, all of us will be interacting through the chat, polls, and participant tabs, which you should see on your screen. Let's start by having you try out the chat function. Share with me what community and what organization you are representing today. We have Alexis from Missouri, Siobhan from Baltimore, Jeff from way out west, Startup Sac in Sacramento. Thank you. Excellent. Now take a look at the menu across the top of the screen. You'll see Agenda, Resource Expo, ESHIP Goals, Connect, and Fun tabs, which are all worth exploring. To ensure that this event is accessible, we're offering closed captioning for all sessions. So should you need that, please go up to the Help menu and the live help desk, and our team will get you set up. The help desk can also assist you with any other questions you might have. One of our key production partners in designing every ESHIP Summit is the Value Web. They are a network of global folks, experts in facilitation and graphic scribes. They help organizations design interactive events that surface collective knowledge, events like this one. So in addition to a half dozen facilitators who you've likely met, we've also got a talented graphic scribe with us, Christopher, who will be tracking along with us today. Our scribes follow the program, and they have over the last 3 days, and have been capturing in real time key insights and knowledge that is being shared. You can always check in with them yourself at any time by going to the Fun tab and then click Live Illustrations. If you missed day 1 and 2, you'll find a rich record of much of what happened and what was captured. It captured in just beautiful ways in that live illustration space. You would be doing yourself a favor by going and checking it out sometime today. Before we dive into our program, let's also try using the poll feature inside of our virtual environment, which we're going to use even more today. So I want to hear from you in 1 or 2 words. Tell us how you are arriving here today. So for example, I'm arriving hopeful because of all the conversations I heard during day 1 and day 2. They're very forward-looking and solution-oriented. And I'm also inspired by the way that you've welcomed and included all the folks who are joining us for their first summit. I hope we can continue to do that today. Before we get started with our first roundtable conversation, I want to tell you a story. It's my story. So I was 23 years old, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I wanted to change the world. But I realized very quickly upon my college graduation that I had a problem, which is I wanted to change the world, but I had absolutely no idea how it actually worked. I'd lived most of my life in the 4 walls of classrooms. And well, I had traveled all over the country. I had never left the United States. And I realized it was slightly egotistical and pretty arrogant of me to want to change the world without ever actually having seen it. So I looked around at all the things you can do when you're 23 years old to travel. You can join the Peace Corps, you can teach English in China or backpack across Europe. I looked around at all the things and quickly realized I couldn't just pick one of them. And so I decided I would just do them all. I'd take a trip around the world. The problem was I didn't have any money. In fact, I owed the federal government about $25,000 in student loans, which, if you think about it, is actually a great reason to leave the country. So I took a really normal job, saved up money each month, and gave myself a deadline of 3 years. At the age of 26, almost 3 years to the day, I quit my job, I sold my things, and with a backpack, a Virgin passport, and a one-way ticket to China, I just left. I'd never been outside the country in my entire life. I was very scared. The purpose of the trip was naively simple: to see how people live in the world, to live like the locals. The goal was to go around the world for a year. I ended up coming back 4 years later. I traveled, worked, and volunteered in 40 different countries. And I did all sorts of odd things to see how the locals live. I lived in a Buddhist temple in Korea. I worked in a dress factory in Bangkok. I helped a guy open the first cupcake factory in China. My undergraduate degree is actually in filmmaking, so I actually worked behind the scenes on 2 Bollywood films, and then I got recruited in front of the camera, and let me just be clear, I don't act. I played a 19th century British soldier in one of the most expensive Bollywood movies ever made. I know what you're thinking, British soldier, right. I lived in a mud hut village in Zambia with a guy who taught me how they farm maize. I worked on a 50,000 acre cattle ranch in Australia. In short, I saw the world. I traveled from 2006 to 2010, and right in the middle of that was 2008. Do y'all remember when we thought that was going to be the biggest crisis of our lifetime? When I look back on that moment now, what I think we're going to see is that 2008 will be a marker we use of a global shift into a new human era. That is to say, 2008 will mark the end of the industrial age. And while the industrial age brought about a lot of advancement in human society, it left many places and many people out. You'll also recall around 2008, Apple launched the iPhone, Google bought YouTube, IBM created Watson, and Facebook and Twitter went global. What I saw on my trip through 40 countries over 4 years, 2 years before 2008 and 2 years after, was that the world shifted into what I think is a new human era. It's really only our fourth. First, we were hunter-gatherers, then we moved to farms and became an agrarian society. Then we moved into cities, driven by the Industrial Revolution. And now we're entering this new era, driven by the exponential growth in technology and connectivity. Many people don't even realize we're here yet, though if you're attending the ESHIP Summit, I probably don't have to tell you. We don't really even have a name for this new era yet, as it's just emerging. But for our purposes today, I'm going to borrow a name from Seth Godin, who calls it the connected age. There are many commentators, economists, historians out there that are naming this shift as well. They call it the creative age, the networked age, the Anthropocene, the age of acceleration. Regardless of what name we use, I want to share with you 4 trends that I saw traveling around the world between 2006 and 2010 through 40 different countries that have only accelerated since then, and that may be helpful for our conversations today. The first trend is that entrepreneurship and innovation have been democratized, by which I mean if you have an idea of something you want to create, the barriers to entry to do that have just collapsed. And while success is still elusive for many, educational opportunities and access to the tools and technologies that help us are making that more accessible to more people. The second trend that I saw traveling around the world is that the individual has been globalized. That is to say, if the industrial age allowed corporations to globalize, meaning they could find resources anywhere in the world, connect them together into something that could then be shared anywhere in the world, in the connected age, this right has now been afforded to nearly anyone and any individual who's connected to the internet. The third trend, and I saw this again and again in big countries and small countries, is that networks are replacing hierarchies. That isn't to say that hierarchies aren't important, but what we're seeing is networks overtaking hierarchies. Think about YouTube versus Hollywood, traditional news versus social networks. Even consider the Arab Spring or the rise of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. They're all decentralized networks with no single figure at the top. The fourth and final trend that I saw traveling through 40 countries across 6 continents over 4 years, and I don't really have to explain this to you all, but that geography doesn't have a monopoly on good ideas, meaning not all the smart people live in New York or Silicon Valley. Smart people and good ideas are everywhere, but some places, like Silicon Valley and New York, have been cultivating for decades the networks that help make new ideas happen. I say all that to say my experience traveling the world and a decade of work since has led me to deeply believe that the communities that will thrive in this new era are those that best help all people make new ideas happen. This has led me on a decades-long journey as a social entrepreneur to do what is now being called entrepreneurial ecosystem building, starting initially in Iowa and then in many communities across the United States. This eventually led me to the Kauffman Foundation, where I'm part of the ecosystem development team, the entrepreneurship department, where we're working to shine a light on these particular practices, which are emerging in many places simultaneously in the United States and around the globe. Ecosystem building is an idea whose time has come and at a moment when we as a society really need it. The ESHIP Summit was born in 2017 out of the idea of bringing together leaders like you who are trying to do this type of work to build your entrepreneurial communities and to better understand what we would need to be successful at that work. Our aim is, and will continue to be, to emerge new practices, programs, and policies that can help people like you do your work better. And in that, we hope to accelerate the emergence of entrepreneurial ecosystem building as an important aspect of economic development, community development, and entrepreneurship development in this new connected age. To explore more of the realities of this connected age, I want to turn now to a conversation about the impacts of this multitude of crises in 2020 on our communities across the United States and around the world, and what we need to prepare for on the day after. So representing the Institute for Work and the Economy, I'd like to invite Mary and Peter into our conversation. Welcome.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. I want to dive right into this, but I want to set this up for you both. We were also supposed to have a third person join us. Peter, can you talk to that just very briefly? Because I know they have a shout out right below the window.
Sure, it's Ronnie Bryant. Ronnie is our chair of the board for the Institute for Work and the Economy. And Ronnie is an entrepreneur and solo practitioner, and I'm sure everybody in the group will understand that clients call, and he could not be with us this morning. So our apologies to the rest.
So to the Ronnie fans out there who showed up to hear from Ronnie, I'm going to have to suffice, but hopefully you'll stick around. But we've got Peter and Mary from the Institute here with us. So I want to dive right into the conversation, but I want to set this up right, because I think it's a fantastic story. And Peter and Mary, you're going to sort of bring some knowledge or help surface some knowledge that you've been working on through this project to help us all better understand sort of where we're at in this year that's 2020, but also this sort of emerging into the connected age. So I just want to make sure to get this right. The Institute for Work and the Economy, which Mary, you're part of the board, and Peter, you're the executive director. And as we noted, Ronnie is the chair of the board, has an initiative called Achieving the Promise of Work. And part of that initiative is this project called The Day After. And the goal of the project is to bring people together in conversation in a variety of sectors and settings in this present moment, this year of sort of layered crises, to help people voice their concerns and explore the changes they wish to see, to really bring together the grassroots leaders in many different segments of society across the United States to explore the challenges and opportunities of what folks are seeing and what are the opportunities to take action. And so you're going to share some of what you've learned. You've convened right now about a half dozen conversations. The goal is to convene more conversations. You've got folks from the disabled community in rural Nebraska. You've got the business community together in Charlotte. You've got long-term healthcare providers in Massachusetts. You've been working with the National Urban League in their centers around the nation to gather folks together. Source America has been another one of your partners. You're going to be working pretty soon with the Duke Endowment on a couple of these conversations. And we're bringing folks together in small groups, and we're looking at sort of what folks are seeing, what they're sensing, what are the problems, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities for action based on all these mini perspectives. The idea here is that creating a space, unfiltered space for ideas from folks who will be taking on the task of helping us rebuild and reinvent our communities and our economies after we get through the present set of crises. This also includes all the folks who are tuned in to the ESHIP Summit as well, very like-minded folks. And then what you're trying to do at the Institute by convening these is to create the space so people know what actions to take in their local communities, but then to be able to identify patterns that you're seeing sort of in the aggregate across these, and then shining a light on those patterns, which is hopefully something that we can talk about today. So let's start with you, Peter. As you've been in on all these conversations, what are you seeing? What's like one thing that really has struck you, or is like aha moment that you're seeing and hearing when you've been sitting in on all these conversations?
Sure. So thanks very much, Andy. We go in with the idea that this is an opportunity to seize the moment. And it's not just the pandemic and the aftermath of it, but also the civil actions that have been taken throughout the country in the wake of George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor, and others who have lost their lives in the course of this year. But I'd say that one of the major aha moments for me has been the intersectionality of these conversations, and also the ability to take the lessons learned from a particular group and be able to expand them and apply them more generally. So for instance, our tendency is to define an issue as a racial issue or as a gender issue, and we tend to isolate and silo it. And in the course of these conversations, what we're learning is that people are, first of all, the solutions that are being offered are not specific to a group, although they will address an inequity or set of inequities that are being that are barriers to a particular group. But the solutions are fundamental in terms of their consequence. And it's been a theme that has been repeated across all of these groups that we've been talking to. Mary?
I guess the one thing that I would say is that obviously everyone has been affected by the pandemic in some way, shape, or form. And one of the things that came across from in talking about what were some of the things that needed to change, or how could they change? And one person commented on that now some hearts have been affected by this. And that therefore, as you start thinking about change or change initiatives, or how do you make people move to a different place, is that often we've been talking about things in terms of from a very perspective of your brain is in it, you've got the ideas, but now the hearts have changed, which is making a new way to make arguments around change, particularly around racial equities and inequities of race, class, whatever, that now the hearts are engaged. And the other comment that somebody made was, we don't just need allies, we need accomplices. And so really coming at this from a much more personal and visceral space in terms of how to make the changes we need.
Yeah, I love that. And so I love that line, we don't just need allies, we need accomplices. And I think it's partially recognized. And we talked about this on day 2, that this, in terms of building equitable, inclusive economies and entrepreneurial ecosystems, it's not just because we're trying to do that to support the folks who've maybe been left out, because when those people are left out, it actually has a significant impact on all of us, because we're actually all part of the same system. Peter, you had mentioned you spoke with some disability, the folks in the disability community in Nebraska. And you had a couple ahas in that conversation of just, how things are changing in the world. Can you share maybe one from that conversation? I thought there were a number of interesting things you brought up.
Actually, you're conflating 2 conversations, but they actually have a common theme, which was really interesting. Okay. So we had a separate conversation. We've had 2 conversations now with both the providers of services to workers with disabilities, as well as the advocacy groups. And then in Nebraska, we had a conversation a week ago with community developers, economic developers, workforce developers across rural Nebraska. And what was really fascinating is that both groups have noted that the normalization of work from home, that being able to work remotely is opening up an array of opportunities to both sets of communities. And it gets back to that intersectionality point that I was making before, that traditionally we would have looked at an accommodation for workers with disabilities as just that. It's just an accommodation for workers with disabilities. The same is true with respect to rural development. Those are accommodations that are needed for effective rural development. And what we kept hearing from both groups was that it is the acceptance now by employers and others of the idea that people can work remotely has opened up new avenues for conversation about what's required to be able to do that. Broadband, the availability of the technologies, and understanding the use of these technologies individually.
Thank you. So, Mary, I want to bring it back to you. One of the things that you said to me before we went sort of our pre-call for this is that there was a clear across all of the conversations. One, it's clear things are changing and things are not going to go back to the way that they were, but that that there is an intense demand, sort of for some bold action and some change, because people are sensing sort of the moment of transition. Can you just talk a little bit more of what you're sensing across all those conversations about what folks are hungry for in their communities?
Yeah, a crisis is always a good thing. You should never waste a good crisis, right? And you should always be able to take advantage of people's willingness to think about things differently. And I think, Peter, you were getting to this in terms of, are these accommodations, are these things we have to kind of do? And I think people are throwing out the old playbooks, recognizing that there is a real opportunity to think about things differently. One of the things we kept hearing was, what are things around new solutions? And I would say, yes, there probably are some new solutions to some of the problems and challenges around workforce development, around how people operate. But actually, there's probably a new environment to even try things that we've tried before, but the environment for making that change was not. It couldn't listen to it. It's sort of like trying to tell somebody, again, when their heart's closed or their mind is closed, the door is closed, and you have a terrific idea. Now, I think those doors are open, and it's coming both from a business perspective. It's coming from employees and customers and suppliers, and sort of the whole society is looking at, particularly businesses, how are they going to operate differently? And I think they're going to be held accountable for thinking about understanding some change that everyone is beginning to feel is important.
And so one of the things that was in our conversation before, you also had mentioned this notion that some leaders in communities are they're trying to do just enough to keep the pot from boiling over. They're taking action, but it's like incremental, and sometimes it's symbolic. But this is a moment that demands more. Can you talk a little bit more to that, Mary? Kind of what you're sensing and hearing from folks as they sort of give feedback on what's going on in their communities?
Sure. I mean, change is hard, right? Change is hard, and and changing something where you feel that you're going to lose something in the change is difficult. And so there are people who have expressed concerns that by opening up or making a change, which makes it easier for other people, other groups to have advantages, to have access, will in some way diminish their ability to maintain their own personal or professional stature. And I think that, again, it's this notion of, and you mentioned it earlier, Andy, that you can't holding something too close just for your own use and not allowing other people to take advantage of it really hurts everyone. The economy won't grow, the ecosystem won't be able to expand if someone is holding too tight. And that's a fear, and we understand that. And so I think you do begin to look at this as, and I hate to sort of sound business school-like, but a change management strategy. Nothing goes forward if you haven't thought about all the pieces that are going to need to come together. So I think this is very clear, but I think that personal fear, when you're talking to people who have had advantages and having to think that they may have to give up some of those advantages is difficult.
And I think that speaks to one of the core things that have come over the last couple of days in terms of thriving entrepreneurial ecosystems or communities, which is you have to have a mindset of abundance, not a mindset of scarcity. And obviously in a crisis, it's easy to have to sort of revert to this notion that if I don't get my piece, then I'm out. But actually in an economy and in an ecosystem, like if we change our mindsets to think of the culture of abundance, that raising up just even part of our community ultimately helps all of us. Peter, I want to take it over to you. So you've obviously listened and heard a lot from a lot of folks, a lot of different trends, the changing nature of work, entrepreneurship, healthcare. I mean, all of these things that we need to work on. What I hear from both of you is this is a moment and an opportunity to make significant and change through bold action and not incremental changes. There's a demand for it. But my sense is, in talking to some folks, is that there's a lot of people looking around what they're supposed to do. And Mary, you just said there that we have to look at the whole system. We have to think how all the parts work together. So Peter, help me understand sort of the so what after all these conversations. So what is the role of leaders in this moment as in sort of what you've gathered through these conversations?
So I would go to the way we've approached these conversations, excuse me, as sort of how I believe a leader should function. One is that we've approached these with humility, that we've approached these conversations as ones where it's our job to listen and learn and to reflect back and to provide a synthesis of the larger conversation so that people can act on it. Second, and part of that is we need to be acting as a guest in the communities in which we're engaged, even if we're a part of that community. Because the most difficult part is bringing around the ideas and people who aren't usually asked to the table. And so if we act as a guest, we're in fact essentially honoring those who aren't typically asked to be part of the conversation. And the third thing is that I've been part of a lot of meetings where somebody walks in and says, okay, we've gathered you here so you can tell us about how we can do our job better, rather than reflect back, ask them and said, okay, what is it that you want to do and how is it that we can help? And then in learning how we can help, we learn how to do our job better.
That's fantastic. It makes me think of if anyone's a fan of Margaret Wheatley, she talks about how in moments of crisis, the role of leaders is to create islands of sanity, places to bring people together to have conversations, not for the convener to solve their problems, but for the community as a whole to do that. And when you have complex challenges that require lots of different actors in a community to work, the role of leaders, which you're doing on a national level, but folks listening can do on a local level, is to create those spaces to bring together folks and to make sure we include the people that are often left out, because they're going to bring different perspectives, insights, and knowledge that maybe we don't have to solve some of the immense challenges, but also the opportunity to build new communities in the connected age. Mary, I want to take it to you and ask you the same question. What is the role of leaders in this moment?
I think it's I agreed with the idea of, convening and getting folks together and figuring out, but it's also, I think leaders also have to do a job of helping to prioritize and helping to, continue to bring people into the system, but also saying we're going to choose a direction and choose it and go forward. We're going to make mistakes as we go along. Of course we will, but sitting around and thinking about it for a long period of time isn't going to help it either. So thinking about how do you bring resources to the table, how do you figure out the additional folks that need to be included, and then make a decision and go forward. So I think that's we're all looking for that leader who's willing to say, we're now going to put some stakes in the ground and give it our best shot.
And I think I would just add, and that's fantastic advice, is that what we've learned over the last 3 days of the summit is the problems are so complex. There's so many different skills we need to solve them. It's actually about a group of leaders, a team of leaders, a network of leaders, and working in collaboration across your community at those points of intersection, Peter, not just the entrepreneurial people over here and the healthcare people over here and the education people over here, how to create the environments in which folks can come together. And then those leaders can help tell that story and prioritize and help make sense of it, which I think you've been doing a fantastic job across the country with many different sectors. Peter, folks wanted to get involved to learn more about what you're doing, to maybe host a conversation in their community with you or on their own, or to support your program. What can they do?
Well, the easiest way is to just get in touch with us. There are links through the promiseofwork.org website. We maintain 3 websites, and the 2 of them are project-based. The one that is most relevant is promiseofwork.org, and you can reach me through that. In addition, we're through the contact mechanism through the conference. I already responded to a couple of people who've reached out through that. This project is being bootstrapped by the Institute. We are looking to find resources to support this. So our capacity to do this is really a function of just our personal, our time to be able to convene these things and to support them. We're happy to also advise others in terms of how they may want to try to do something like this on their own. So we are looking for some resources to really punch this up and broadly expand it and allow us the capacity to be able to stay with communities as invited in terms of their follow-up and implementation of some of the ideas they come across.
Fantastic. And Peter and Mary have been with us the whole summit. Ronnie will have to bring him back for a future session to dig into what he knows, which I'm excited to do. Thank you, Peter, Mary, for joining us. What I heard is this is the moment. Don't waste a good crisis to bring people together to think about collective action and an intent that we want to make a change, to reinvent the systems in our communities in this connected age, and that it is only together, no one organization or individual can do it, that we're going to be able to get through these crises and reinvent really our economies and our communities for the connected age. Thank you, Mary and Peter, for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. Well, before we go on to our final speaker for this session, I want to share a video with you. As you've seen throughout the event, we've been featuring stories of efforts going on in communities across the United States to build more equitable and inclusive entrepreneurial communities. So we're going to travel virtually now to Cincinnati, where some of my colleagues went on a pre-pandemic trip to learn more about what's going on there at Mortar.
Downtown, actually.
Yeah?
Downtown work.
What about it?
Welcome. How are you? Hey.
Morning.
One of our alums who was in a crisis kind of birthed this concept of, well, what if we had money we could contribute? And one of the things that we've tried to do is create this laboratory type environment where people can come in and experiment. We don't want you to have all of the answers, but if you have all of the questions, we can figure it out. But we're trying to make sure that people have at least the space to fail, and then we're giving them the environment and the climate where failure is okay as long as you're learning from it.
We are willing to work with everybody, but that has come at a price for these guys because everybody wasn't willing to work with them.
And the thing is, like, people do this every day with tech because it's sexy and people are throwing money at them to fail. I'll give you millions of dollars to fail trying something, and it's like, but when it's a lifestyle business, you don't get those same opportunities.
On this street, where do they go? And they're going to come here to the corporate space.
We understand what our niche is. We are specifically not a tech organization because the people that we want to help are in this position, and we want to help them get from this position out.
We see successful entrepreneurs everywhere, and we're not going to disqualify someone because they have tattoos in their face or because they have bad credit.
There's a lot of organizations that work with entrepreneurs that say we're here to help all entrepreneurs, but the reality is the way they define entrepreneur excludes a lot of people. It's a very narrow definition. Right. But when I heard you all talk, it sounds like when you all say who, you literally mean anybody.
The way that conversation is being changed, the way that a population that may have been an underdog in the past is now being invited to participate now in ways that they haven't been before, is something that, again, may not come up on a grant report. I don't know how you measure that, but that optimism and hope that is now becoming commonplace in the city is something that's happening, but it's hard to measure that.
I think that people are seeing that mortar is one of the entities that could catalyze strength.
As we've seen throughout the summit, these types of inclusive, equitable, and resource-rich communities don't just happen. Many places have the elements of an entrepreneurial ecosystem, but they remain nascent and disconnected, and very often exclude people because of how they look or where they come from. And this, when you consider the whole system, the whole communities we just discussed, really hurts everyone. The primary function of an entrepreneurial ecosystem is to move knowledge and resources from the people who have it to the entrepreneurs who need it. Let me say that one more time. The primary function of an entrepreneurial ecosystem is to move knowledge and resources from the people who have it to the entrepreneurs who need it. These ecosystems can't be bought, they have to be built. And this requires leaders, as we discussed, actually a network of them, to work intentionally to foster a connected, inclusive system of support for entrepreneurs of all types. At its heart, entrepreneurial ecosystem building is about creating consistent, collaborative human engagement across the whole system of support for entrepreneurs in your community. This new leadership role of the ecosystem builder, a person or persons whose entire job is to think about the whole system, isn't just a fancy new word for traditional entrepreneurial support, though that still has a very essential role to play in this. Entrepreneurial ecosystem building is really a new emerging practice. It's emerging at the intersection of economic development, community development, workforce development, and entrepreneurial development. That really shows up in the diversity of folks who are with us throughout the summit. This includes everyone. This practice of entrepreneurial ecosystem building has emerged over the last few decades as technology and hyperconnectivity has brought us into this new connected age. This new era requires us to rethink the ways our communities have been doing things in nearly every way. COVID-19 hasn't created most of the problems we face today, nor the inequalities of our current systems. It simply has made them more visible. All of this is happening at a time when significant demographic shifts are also changing the makeup of the United States. By 2055, there will be no single racial or ethnic majority in the United States. And if current economic trends continue, by 2053, the median wealth of Black families in the United States will reach 0. And by 2070, that will be true for Latino families as well. If a majority of our country has 0 net wealth, that doesn't just affect Black and Latino communities, it affects all of us, especially those who wish to see more successful business owners, customers, investors, neighbors, tax-paying citizens, and communities. This global pandemic has brought into sharp focus the shortcomings and inequalities of our present economic system and the clear and present need to rethink our approach to how we build and sustain our local communities. We must consider how we replace our current ways of thinking that in many cases came about in the industrial age. As we shift into the connected era, we find ourselves at this once-in-a-human era moment to reimagine our communities for the future and to evolve our economic development approaches in more just, equitable, and inclusive ways. If we do this, our communities can realize their full potential by unlocking the latent talent of all of our citizens. And while entrepreneurial ecosystem building is just one component of the many things our communities need to reimagine, healthcare, political systems, education systems, environmental impact, do remember that entrepreneurs are often the people who do just that for a living. Entrepreneurs not only create a majority of net new jobs, they also help move our society forward. So ecosystem building requires a diverse set of skills, as you know. Coalition building, complex collaboration, managing power dynamics, understanding race, equity, and inclusion, continuous learning, and a lot of grit and creative thinking along the way. It requires a diversity of skills and abilities, and for the most of the people doing it today, you're figuring out much of it as you go. While there's momentum that is certainly growing for entrepreneurial ecosystem building, challenges still remain. As an emerging practice, many ecosystem builders are operating without data-driven practices or a support system of peers. And without widespread understanding of the practice, many of you grapple with the challenge of simply explaining your work. But over the last decade, we've seen more and more support programs arise to help entrepreneurial ecosystem builders or those who are building entrepreneurial communities. Many of those resources you can actually find above in the Resource Expo. The good news is that there's also a growing movement to accelerate entrepreneurial ecosystem building or entrepreneurship-led economic development as a professional field of practice. So we're going to spend today exploring and celebrating a number of those efforts to foster a more supportive environment for entrepreneurial ecosystem builders locally, nationally, and globally. To get us started, I'd like to turn the program over to a good friend of mine, Beth Zimmer, who is an entrepreneur turned ecosystem builder based in Erie, Pennsylvania. She's also one of our ESHIP Goal champions. I've asked Beth to share her story with you today and some thoughts on our collective road ahead to grow our professional field of practice. Beth?
Thank you, Andy. And thank you, Kauffman Foundation and team, for this amazing, amazing virtual ESHIP Summit 2020. So when Andy gave me a call and asked me to tell my story, I was a little uncomfortable, but came around to the fact that when you go through something very difficult, one of the reasons is that you need to use that experience to help others later. Andy's reasoning, and I totally agree, is that if our work was done, if the professional field of entrepreneurial ecosystem building was done, it's a credible profession, very well respected in economic and community development organizations and across the globe. If that was done, my story would have ended, well, it's not over. My story will end much differently than what I'm about to tell you. So several years ago, I convinced an angel investor network to expand up into our region. And it was a business development act. I wanted to help our startups get investment and mentoring, most importantly, to help them either fail fast or start, grow, create jobs, create more wealth for our community, et cetera, et cetera. That means more business for everybody, right? So, and 6 months in, none of our startups from our community were getting through the screening process. So I asked myself, why? Is our environment not conducive to startups? I was also the premier technical and executive recruiter in the region. So I know the smartest people, and I know who's most dedicated to the success of our community. And I pulled about 20 of those folks together and started talking about the solution to this problem. Was it a problem? Who could tell us if it really is a problem? So we got a state grant, a pretty competitive one, and that was exciting, that enabled us to bring in some experts that have been all over the country doing this kind of work. They assessed our community, our region, and confirmed our assumptions that, yeah, our entrepreneurial ecosystem was severely underdeveloped. And they provided us with a work plan based on all the lessons they've learned over the years with other communities and their own. So what they told us was the number one priority was that we had to change our community's culture. What? How do you change a community's culture? I've been around HR professionals pretty much most of my career. I know how very difficult it is to change a culture for a company. How do you do it for a community or a region? Well, also concurrent to the work plan coming out and the assessment, we were talking to the community and economic development organizations across the region and asking them really who owns this space, who can take on this work, super important work. And unfortunately, none of them had the capacity or frankly, the interest. So we had to stand up a charitable organization, a 501c3. Our goal from day one, work ourselves out of a job within 3 years. So we were going to work on the culture shift for 3 years. We were going to work on educating the community at all walks of life, from elementary school age all the way through senior citizens, educating them as to what entrepreneurship was and why it's so important if we ever want our community to thrive. We created a micro global awareness campaign. Remember Got Milk or Your Brain on Drugs or the Smoking Cessation Program, something like that. So we created this plan and executed on it for over 3 years, and it worked. Yeah, the commercials, the billboards, the events, the trainings, the talks at Rotarians, etc. Anyway, that worked, and everybody was talking and excited about entrepreneurship going on. And at the 3-year mark, the CEO of the organization that we really thought the function should reside in and be sustained announced retirement. We're like, whoa, universe, aligning perfectly. Maybe the new leadership will be excited about our function and taking it on. And sure enough, that new CEO comes in and can't wait to get the work integrated, working on a broader economic development strategy, plug in this function in, et cetera, et cetera. And lo and behold, 6 months later, I have a meeting with him. We'll back up a little bit. Okay, so right around that time, when he came in, there were a few other people, key actors in the ecosystem that moved here from other places, so really didn't have any history of what had been going on prior. We certainly met with them to build the trust and familiarize them with what had been going on before they arrived. But in any case, that 6 months was strange for me, and I'm extremely intuitive. So I had feeling, and also my deep network is sharing specifics with me and confirming that my intuitions were correct, that there were people that didn't, even though the majority of people support this notion, there were people out there that didn't want this work to succeed and were working behind the scenes to take us out, if you will, and do some really crazy things. So at the end, towards 6 months, I approached that new leader and said, this function coming into your organization, it's fantastic. It's what we hoped for all along. I'm thinking maybe I should work with you or for you for 12, 18 months to stand the thing up and build it into the actual ecosystem building function that it's meant to be. And he backstepped. He said, Beth, we're deprioritizing entrepreneurial development. There's so much going on around entrepreneurship in the region. What else would there be left for us to do? I was shocked. Don't know how I found the words, but I reminded him of what we'd been talking about for 6 months. The ecosystem building function, the collective impact, backbone support for the entrepreneurs and the people that provide support to them. The entrepreneurial ecosystem building function that convenes them all to talk about the ecosystem as a whole, to talk about where the gaps are, how to fill them, who fills them, where are the resources. If we need more resources and funding, going to the funders with one voice. How do we know what we're doing? Are we measuring our outcomes to see if we're doing well or if we need to improve even more? How do you not have that that makes perfect sense? It's common sense function. And the rest of that meeting is like, I don't remember it at all. I was devastated. I was in physical pain for several days after that. Then a bright spot the next week. I have a meeting with our mayor. He's on his way to the mayor's conference at the ESHIP Summit at the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City. So we were talking about going there, and I was going there, and my work with ESHIP, and it was a very good, exciting time for that. And then he asked me, of course, how are things going here? Told him about my conversation, and he was very concerned. He was very concerned. So we pulled a meeting together of that leader and myself and the county executive, who, God bless her, before she even decided to run for office, she was part of the founding team to get this work done. We all met. We were unable to shift that leader's mindset. So the city and the county looked to try to resource the function and build it up to what it needed to be. Unfortunately, those attempts failed. And at the end of October last year, 2019, our organization ran out of funding and had to be put on the shelf. My heart breaks that I'm watching this backsliding, and there's no talk of encouraging entrepreneurship. There are programs popping up, but no rhyme or reason as to why, what gap they're filling, or if those resources need to go to that today, or if there's something that needs to be paid attention to first. Like, we still don't have nearly enough startups, let alone deal flow for investors. In any case, I'm telling you this story because, again, exclamation point on our work this afternoon, and how very important it is that we stand up the professional field of entrepreneurial ecosystem building, so that this type of thing can't really happen, because everybody has respect and credibility around the field. 3 things to think about while we're working today. 3 goals. Storytelling. Resource the heck out of the storytelling that has been going on and needs to continue and grow in perpetuity. It's so important to sustain this work. Number 2, national resource providers. You benefit the most from our success. Please work with us and help us resource these goals and initiatives and other solutions that we haven't even thought of yet. And lastly, Ecosystem Builder Nation, let's hold each other accountable. Let's get this work done. Let's get them the goals and initiatives resourced. Let's stand up that standards body and get it done. Thank you, and I'll see you on the other side.
Thank you, Beth, for agreeing to share that personal story with everyone. I think you drive home a number of excellent points. And thank you for your involvement in the efforts to grow and accelerate this professional field of practice for ecosystem builders. Your point is that we all need to be involved. It's going to take all of us on many different levels. And while many of you are focused in your work in local communities, which is what we focused on day 1 and 2, today we're going to pick our head up and we're going to look at the whole field and those of us who want to contribute to support the growing field. This work has to be a collective effort, and we're going to spend the rest of the day doing just that. No one organization or individual, not even the Kauffman Foundation, can build this field alone. Very similar to the work that you may be doing in your local communities, building the professional field requires all of us to really understand our place in this field or this system, to really understand our roles are interdependent with each other, and to work together to deliver it. So in 2017, to take you back a bit, in a collaborative, community-driven effort to try to accelerate this emerging field, this emerging practice across the United States, our team at the Kauffman Foundation and 65 of those national resource providers Beth mentioned who support ecosystem builders embarked on a journey that began with that first summit in 2017. We have used a 3-phase framework to organize our efforts. We call it Discover, Design, Deliver. Discover, Design, Deliver. So in 2017, we kicked off the Discover year by bringing 500 early adopters of ecosystem building from a dozen sectors across the nation to Kansas City to meet and explore their work and to collectively uncover the things we felt we needed as ecosystem builders to be more effective. Over the course of that year, we spoke with each of the 65 national resource providers to better understand their efforts and needs, as well as interviewed and explored the efforts and needs of over 100 ecosystem builders across the United States. In 2018, at the second ESHIP Summit, we organized all those needs that surfaced into 7 buckets, what we call the 7 ESHIP Goals. Modeled after the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, the ESHIP Goals aim to capture at a high level the foundational elements needed to create an accessible and sustainable professional field of support for those building entrepreneurial ecosystems in their communities. If the 17 SDGs are the 17 things we need to do to ensure a sustainable society and planet, then the 7 ESHIP Goals are the 7 things we need to ensure a sustainable and supportive professional field to help ecosystem builders like Beth do their work more effectively and for more people to better understand and take on this practice in their community. During the design year, which began at the 2018 ESHIP Summit, hundreds of people worked to identify and prioritize 30 specific initiatives that would help the community achieve the 7 ESHIP Goals. These 30 prioritized initiatives included a field-wide vision and value set, common and agreed upon terminology, more concrete methods, metrics, and training opportunities. They prioritized the list of prioritized initiatives called for better ways to work with policymakers, address issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion across the field, and to create more peer support networks and storytelling initiatives that shine a light on the array of people, all of you, building ecosystems across the country in many different sectors. The 7 goals and 30 prioritized initiatives were christened at the 2019 ESHIP Summit as we shifted into what will certainly be a multi-year effort to deliver on the ESHIP goals. Now, a year later, as we get into this deliver phase, or really just the beginning of the deliver phase, we're here at this moment in time to check in with ourselves to see what we've already achieved. Today, we'll celebrate ESHIP goal projects that have come to fruition, accelerate projects that are sprouting, and plant some seeds around a few projects looking to grow in the year ahead. So this afternoon, we're going to host 3 rounds of breakout sessions to do just that, and you're invited. In round 1, we'll celebrate fully launched ESHIP goal projects that are already having an impact, and we'll share our gratitude, hopefully, to those folks who created them. For round 2, we'll work together to accelerate projects that are being piloted or just getting started. Their creators want to hear your feedback and suggestions on how to make them more impactful. For breakout round number 3, we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to get to work in small groups and ideate around 4 new projects that are just sprouting. Well, we can't highlight every single ESHIP goal project that's going on in just one afternoon. I do want to draw your attention to the ESHIP Goal Project Garden, which you can find in the ESHIP Goals tab above. The garden, which is still being constructed, it's spring there in the ESHIP Goal Garden, is where we're trying to capture the many efforts going on in many places by many people to solve for the ESHIP goals. Because we're doing this through mass collaboration and there's no centralized way to capture everything, we're trying to seed that garden. In that garden, we've identified nearly 50 current projects. If you're working on something that's not yet included in the garden, I'd love to add it, or maybe something we missed. You can find instructions on how to do so right inside the garden. If you want to learn more about the specifics of the 7 ESHIP goals and 30 prioritized initiatives, spend some time exploring the ESHIP Goals tab above over lunch or when you have a moment. If after all that, you've got questions or want to get more involved, there's some folks amongst us who can help. The ESHIP Goal champions have been identified and nominated by the Summit community as individuals who have demonstrated ongoing efforts to move the professional field of entrepreneurial ecosystem building forward. These goal champions serve as ambassadors, cheerleaders, and passionate advocates for the field. They're who I look to as an example of servant leadership, and the community has identified for their efforts. The ESHIP Goal champions have been meeting year-round and provide leadership for these ongoing efforts and are supported by Cecilia and Christine, who most of you have met, who lead our community activation efforts for the ESHIP Summit and Goals community, and they've done that for the last 2 years. So don't hesitate to reach out to any of these folks today and beyond. They can answer your questions around the ESHIP goals and suggest ways you might contribute to their efforts. One way easily to find them is to search for Goal Champions in the participant list in the Connected tab above. I hope you reach out to them. Before we break for lunch, I have one more poll question for you. So thinking about those 7 ESHIP goals, which of the 7 goals do you have? Which of the 7 goals do you have the most interest in at this moment? Pick one. If you're new to the ESHIP goals and you don't know, just follow your energy based on what you know. There are really no wrong answers here. Thank you. Now we're going to go to our first break of the day. You might want to grab lunch if that's what your clock is telling you to do. Over the lunch hour, we've created a networking opportunity for you to eat lunch with a small group of people, just like on day 2. You can join us there if you want to meet new folks. Your second option over lunch is to take a self-guided tour of the Resource Expo, which is just chock full of ecosystem building programs and tools from over 65 national resource providers that are here to help you. To take us out to lunch, on our break, we're going to travel virtually now to Minnesota to take a look at ecosystem building efforts in Minneapolis and St. Paul.
We didn't design Forge North to be a new organization or a new program. We created it to get things done together. My job is to help lead Ministar. We're a nonprofit that's built to serve an incredible community of technologists. For years, our events have helped tech entrepreneurs demo products and introduce new ideas. We play an important role in the ecosystem. So do others. Think about all the programs that exist, from competitions to incubators and accelerators. All of them exist to serve the risk takers who are working every day to solve problems, start ventures, and scale their impact. We built Forge North so we can accelerate their work. It's how I've been able to partner with accelerators, connect to the food or healthcare community, or refer our demo participants to new investors and programs. It's how we've shown up as a team everywhere from Texas to Toronto, and it's inspiring us to dream bigger. Entrepreneurs travel different paths and they move at their own pace. Some of them bootstrap and some raise venture money. Some need mentorship and expertise that others don't. If we're not working together as a community to connect more inclusively, to celebrate each other more proudly, to challenge ourselves to dream bigger, we're not only letting those problem solvers down, we're limiting our own potential. We worked with the Greater MSP Partnership because we needed a strong platform to collaborate. Each of us has a superpower. We need a lot more heroes to join us in this effort. It's hard to describe Forge North because I can't compare it to anything else. It's a rally cry. It's how we work together, and it's where we're going next.
Kept thinking, okay, I have this really cool skill set. If I finish my work with NASA, I could go work for a lot of people. Going to the first 48-hour launch event hosted by Collab is really the first time gave me the idea saying, hey, I should really consider this concept of maybe starting my own company. I went to Collab and brought in my device. I said, this is what I do, and I'm thinking about taking this concept I have with connecting sensors with smartphones and take it further outside of NASA and create my own products. And they were kind of really surprised because they did not realize this type of technology is developed in Chattanooga or is being developed in Chattanooga.
Pretty amazing to see an engineer come in off the street. We had never met him, and just sit down on a couch and start brainstorming ideas to what he's doing now, which is revolutionizing paint and interiors. They're doing really innovative stuff out of a city like Chattanooga, where a lot of people would never have imagined these kinds of innovations coming from.
I think to an outsider, someone who's not from Chattanooga, it might be surprising that someone like George would be here and would be doing what he's doing. But I think George is but one of a number of examples now of really Silicon Valley caliber companies here in Chattanooga. And that's a really good combination. Particularly if you're an investor, you're going to be looking for great opportunities, great entrepreneurs, great companies, but you oftentimes want to look a little bit off the beaten track.
So when we first started Collab, we got the question of why Chattanooga all the time. And my reply to them was always, why not Chattanooga? There's a lot of resources here that have been untapped for a really long time.
We've been doing this for 7 years, and you learn a lot. If I looked at myself from 7 years ago, I would not recognize myself. It's that drastic of a change. We learned so much about how to run a business, how to actually produce and manufacture. And we're also sharing that skill set to others so that people do not make the same mistakes, or people can get there faster than we did.
It's very cool when you see someone like George who's come all the way through to come full circle and begin to be, a support to organizations like ours and the students that we work with is pretty cool. And we see that, not just with him, but with other entrepreneurs as well.
Really 10 years ago, the entrepreneurial ecosystem didn't look anything like it looks today. It was largely driven by older industry companies that had some success. As far as this new generation of entrepreneurship, Chattanooga really was not there. With the advent of the gig infrastructure from ETB, we kind of launched ourselves into the innovation economy, and that allowed us to attract some incredible companies to the space.
We see more students after graduation staying in Chattanooga because I think Chattanooga has now a lot more opportunities that the students can get involved with, and this is part of it is students that are getting involved either in bigger companies or startup companies because there are more opportunities here in town. And now in Chattanooga, we can really generate enough graduates from UTC that they can get involved with these companies. There are a lot of opportunities for them that they can choose from.
In 2017, Chattanooga had the 6th highest wage growth in the country for any size area. That's huge for us because when we see entrepreneurship growing in our community, that lifts wages and changes an entire community's future.
I wanted to make a greater impact. I wanted to be able to create something, to invent. And that's really kind of been my driving purpose behind life. In order to really build the things that you want to build, you have to start a company to be able to do that. Because if you work for a company, it's very unlikely that you will build the things that you want to build, but rather you build the things other people want to build.
For us to look back and just think that, that couch over there is where a lot of this stuff kind of got started on the commercialization side of things. It's cool for us to be a part of that journey, but he's the one that's done all of the hard work. We just played a small role in that.
The desire to help entrepreneurs is pretty basic, where other people have helped me, and I want to help others as well to grow their ideas. Especially, so much of what I've learned, I don't want to just bottle up in myself. I want to share that so that other people can learn.
We are looking at problems collaboratively. We look at it together to see that where are the problems from different aspects, what are the challenges, what are the research and development that we can do here in Chattanooga with UTC and other entities. And that is helping us to bring that knowledge back to the university and train students for that as well.
I think entrepreneurship here in Chattanooga is on the rise. I think it's been a few decades of hard work from a lot of people, but I think we now have real momentum.
But Chattanooga is a very cohesive community where they come together and support, truly puts an effort in supporting a startup ecosystem. And over the last 10 years, it's starting to pay off and clearly shows. I'm kind of excited to see what the next 10 years will look like.